How do you scratch that itch then in the job that you're in now?
Hope springs eternal, right? I mean, every year in January, I think, right, that the next year is going to be a lot calmer and that you can do a little bit of teaching, maybe write something, and so on. I vividly remember January 2020, right, and I had just closed a massive deal, right, that was also really important strategically for the school and that was important for the financial um, well-being. And sitting there in January and thought, okay, right, you're out of the rough now. 18 months of your presidency, right? Very difficult, all these, and now it's smooth sailing for the next 3 years, right? And lo and behold, right, 2 months later, we had the global pandemic. I mean, something that nobody expected, right? And there was another crisis, right? But this is also, I mean, it was a little bit okay, right? You've been there, you've been done this before, it's different, right? This pandemic, but you have also managed successfully through a crisis. You're also going to survive that one. So there's that. On the other hand, right, what I really...
I'm sorry, I'm just going to pause. The first crisis was when you took your first year, there was the big financial hit.
Yes, exactly, right? New building, right? Growth not as strong as we expected it to be, right? So first time for at least a decade where the school made a financial loss, right?
And that was in your first year.
That was right in my first year,
Yeah.
right? And
how did you get through that? Like, not the school. How did you get through that?
As a person,
yeah,
I think it was all about embracing the challenge and being prepared for it by the end of the day. I mentioned this before, right? This willingness to make tough decisions. And I came into this job, right, with this idea that I will have to make tough decisions. And it was great to see, right, that first of all, I could not evade them, right? Because, I mean, we had to do some cost cutting. We had to, I mean, make some changes in the team that I was not afraid during the first 6 months to actually call the shots there. That was very important for me. To find out that I can actually do this. And second, I think what was also quite critical, also the pandemic, right? Being a strategist and having a strategy, right? A lot of the tough calls were informed about what the strategy for Frankfurt School is. And I think that actually helped me a lot in my decision making, right? So, and to be honest, I mean, it was a really, really tough time back then. But it didn't feel like this. It felt like, okay, this is part of the job. And this also helped me then, right, when the pandemic came around. You've been there, you've done that, you will manage. And that gave me a lot of confidence.
So I want to get back to the question. I'd asked, how do you kind of scratch that itch of being creative, being really growth-minded, being able to work with students that you had as a professor and switching into the role? And the first thing you said was hope springs eternal. And, I thought at the beginning of January 2020, I was going to be able to do that when we go off the pandemic. But before we get into anything about the pandemic, so how do you do it? How do you take care of that side of yourself?
I think, I mean, I came to the realization, right, that part of being a CEO is actually pretty creative, right? That you have to think about, not about all these operational problems, but what's the next step? Right? How can we preserve this in the long term? And I think this is also something that I was struggling with at the beginning, right? That I just constantly got drawn into all the operational details. And I didn't have a lot of time for strategy, right? And I think this is something, I mean, I always wanted to delegate. I always had this understanding, okay, as an effective leader, you have to delegate, you have to trust people. But I realized that this is actually not that easy, because people very often don't want to make decisions because it dissipates ownership, dissipates responsibility. I remember sitting here in this room, right, where the question was whether people should wear caps and gowns at our graduation ceremony. I could care less, right? I mean, somebody needs to make a decision and then make it look good one way or the other, right? And that is, I think, something that I became a lot more effective with. So I think that is something that also, I mean, is a case now. I'm much, much better to focus on some of the more interesting strategic questions. Where should the school be 5 years down the road? What is the next thing in terms of new services that we want to offer? How can we expand our campus? And that's exciting stuff, right? And also, I think, right, what is also I found interesting was, I mean, that the student interactions changes. Right? So I'm not in the classroom any longer, but I do have still a lot of interaction with students about different topics now, but that's also quite rewarding. So it's really about this shift in what makes me tick, right? And once again, I think the cool thing is, right, if I want to go back to my former life, right, I can always do that, right? The question will be, right, that given also how I have changed, whether I ever want to go back to this. I don't know. I can't tell you, right? And I also, I mean, this is, right, I remember I was in Milan, and one of my friends there also said, okay, after 5 years, I mean, you're not publishing stuff any longer. Who will hire you later on? Right? And I said, I don't care, because I mean, right, I do have this confidence that something else will come at one point, because that's very much also my experience, right? That opportunities present themselves, right, if you do a good job.